like shrine,
Mm-hmm.
where they have to go to get more magical semen. So, ugh. Okay. So the best of sounded like it was quite the task. I take it.
Well, so I was fine the first time, and my iMac is having some horrible issue where it like goes to sleep. It doesn't go to sleep; just the screen goes black, which I think is at this point like my video card failing. But basically, it goes black and can't be woken up, and so the only way to fix this is to reboot the computer manually. And Adobe Audition is like a delicate teacup, but if you like quit all of a sudden without informing it that you're doing so, it like destroys everything you're working on. So it did that thing where it like replaced the file that I'd edited with like a repeating 3-second clip of Sam saying something. So, and there was like no way to recover. So I had to just re-edit the whole thing, and I definitely, cut a few more corners this time, and was like, if we were like talking over each other for a second, I was just like, oh, I'm leaving that shit in.
Okay.
So I mean, it's still fine. There's like 35 tags on it. It's great. It was a very shaggy episode, and there was a lot of banter, and it was very. I think it worked pretty well.
Okay. I guess let's. I think I got everything up. So.
All right. I am rolling.
Rolling.
All right. 1, 2,
3, 4.
Okay. And this is hotel spa potions.
Hotel spa potions?
Yeah.
Okay. Hello and welcome to the Life in the Kraken podcast, Fillory edition. Your dose of the magicians deep within the Break Bills library. I'm your host, David Robertson, editor-in-chief of We've Always Lived in the Kraken blog. And joining me from the Austin office is managing editor of the same blog, Josh Kayusewitz.
Is it really champagne if he renames it champagne? I think this is a philosophical question that deserves exploring.
Well, no, obviously it becomes champagna. That's the obvious solution. So, in this edition of the podcast, we're going to be going over episode 2 of season 2 of The Magicians, Hotel Spa Potions. And I guess before we do, I suppose for the time being, allow Caillou to recap the episode until I decide it is no longer something I want in the show.
Hooray! I have zero evidence of this, but I'm absolutely sure that this is a fan favorite segment from our Game of Thrones series. So I'm glad to be bringing it back to the Magicians. So in this episode, overall it was Quentin and the gang returning to Break Bills to enlist the Dean's help in finding battle magic sufficiently powerful to kill the Beast. Meanwhile, in New York, Julia and the Beast worked on finding some human bait for their Renard trap. They eventually got Marina on their side because she's scared that Renard was going around murdering hedge witches. Also, the Beast will not stop singing, which was great. Elliot in Fillory learned that as magic dies, so too his people's food supply. He had to draw on his terrible childhood growing up on a farm to teach them normal, non-magical agriculture. He's also struggling to deal with trying to fulfill his new wife's needs while also being gay, which I think is pretty clear at this point, just by what we talked about last episode.
Well, we'll get into that. I still think that's not entirely true, but
we'll get into it.
Yeah, we'll get into it.
Penny kicked Josh in the groin and then tried to seduce his professor while she was trying to fix his cursed hands because Penny is crazy. Eventually, the dean led the gang to a former Break Bills teacher of battle magic, who gave Alice a powerful spell to kill the Beast and anyone else within 20 feet of him. But Alice's god juice is wearing off, so they're running out of time. The dean gave the gang their I can never remember how to pronounce this. The Cacao demons.
Cacao demons.
Cacao demon. Whatever. He pronounced it slightly weird. He gave the gang their Cacao demons as a one-off weapon against the beast, so that Alice has time to line up her shot. Finally, Quentin and Julia met and traded information. He warned her that they're not waiting for her revenge to be accomplished before they kill the beast, and she told him the beast put a curse on the Fillory castle, which I'm sure we'll learn more about next episode.
Okay, this is why I now remember I didn't want this segment last week, because it's unnecessary for this show. So that may be the only time we ever have this in the episode. So enjoy it, fans of the non-existent fans of that segment.
Fan favorite. I've gotten literally 0 letters about this.
If we get a letter, we'll talk about this. So kind of a lot did happen as the show kind of was, I guess, like kind of resetting and then setting back up things after kind of having to clear the deck from the finale. I was going to start with Julia, but actually I think we're going to go ahead and start with the Elliot stuff, because one thing we were concerned about last week was that they might skip through a lot of the Elliot learning how to be a leader phase. And instead, they actually showed it to us. And it was quite interesting, even though he was, of course, forced to interact with a bunch of basically Fillory, let's just say Fillory people who lack the ability to talk correctly to him, which was a little sad. But, you know, his wife did the best she could. So I guess the first thing to go over is, what do you think of just the general thing of how they like use this example to show more of Elliot's backstory and see him kind of interact with slightly less dickish people?
This was a storyline where I liked a lot of the ideas they were going for, but a lot of the execution I found lacking in general. For one thing, I feel like, you know, if they're going to split Elliot off into his own show, it needs more characters in it. It's kind of not enough that right now he's just got his wife, and everybody else is just like generic Fillory person number 4. He needs to sort of surround himself with characters, which I think is true for any show that kind of splits its people off like that. You know, especially because, like, I mean, Elliot is just, you know, kind of floundering in terms of being able to bounce his personality off of people, because his wife is just like not able to hit back things at him, like, you know, bantering about champagne or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, she's trying, and I think she might get there, but she needs some help.
Yeah. So, you know, that bothered me. That whole scene with the naked dudes bothered me, not because they were naked dudes, but because it was like so awkwardly like framed and shot. And
it wasn't just naked dudes; it was naked dudes and naked women. He wanted to have a massive orgy with all sexes. There were more dudes than women, but there were definitely women there.
Okay, but the point is, like, they were kind of like they were like weirdly lined up. Like, it wasn't like, I don't even quite know what they were trying to do there, or what Elliot was trying to do. Like, were they going to stand there and have sex standing behind that couch while he had sex? I don't know. It seemed really strange.
I think they were trying to establish that he was just trying to make things a little more. See, it's hard to entirely say. I will agree that, like you said, that they definitely at least tilted his spectrum more towards him being gay. I still think it's actually more that, and I said this last week, is I think he greatly prefers men, but I'm still not entirely convinced they're going fully in that direction. And I thought instead it was more like he was kind of being like, my sex is not tame, and he wanted like something crazy there to like help like continue some level of craziness in it to help him adjust. I think less of this if, let's say, it was just all dudes, but it wasn't.
It's hard to say what he wants, because I don't think the writing was clear enough on it. Partly because I think they're kind of just dancing around the more graphic details. But it seemed like, you know, it was hard to tell whether the problem for him was that this is a new person I just got like arranged married to, and I don't have the intimacy there yet to just like have sex with her in a way that's, you know, certainly, you know, it's not like he needed something, you know, he doesn't always need something crazy necessarily, but he probably needs something that he cares about. Or it was either that, or it was like, I don't either I haven't or I don't often have sex with women, and so I need some kind of crutch to deal with that. And it was just unclear which of those was like the primary concern there.
Yeah, I mean that's true. I mean that's kind of why I'm not entirely sure. I mean I definitely think it reinforced what we said, which is, I think the other problem is that if they were trying to go like this seemed to be the perfect setup to suggest a more spectrum-based sexuality, which TV has historically struggled with quite a bit, because they don't really know how to do, like they almost never bother doing bi, which is the simplest one of this, but like the version in which it feels like they were alluding to is the one where it's like, he definitely is leaning more towards men, but like it's not like outside this possibility for women. And like because the way he kind of at least reacts to her at least makes you suggest that it's not entirely just like, oh my God, this is a woman, I can't handle this. But you're right. I mean, it's weird. It's hard to properly tell because the writing doesn't seem precise enough on this, and it kind of has to be. And I'm not even going to blame this show for like, it's not like this show is fault entirely for like why it has to be. It's like all of television's fault. Like they're so bad at handling spectrum sexuality that like you have to be specific or it's going to get really muddled.
Yeah, I mean, like I think the more nuanced version of this would have been that like they have that scene kind of as it plays out, and he decides to send the people away and just be with her. But then they wouldn't have done what they did later, which is come back and reveal that like they were not successful because he was apologizing to her, and it might have been more interesting if like over time it was like something that he could do, but he was like growing kind of unhappy with it.
Yeah, I mean, part of it is also like, and I had forgotten before they showed I had completely forgotten the entirety of this conversation. I knew a rough one, which is like the Margot and Elliot conversation. There's actually part of me that wondered if that actually existed in the show or if they're just trying to pretend it existed. I'm sure it did.
Which conversation is this?
In the like previously ons, they had a conversation where it shows her being like, you have to marry this person. You can only ever be with her.
Oh, yeah. I didn't remember that either.
Yeah, and there was a part of me, it's like, was that conversation actually in the episode, or was that like shot but never actually put in, and now they're just trying to like slip that back in there? No, I'm sure it was there, but I'm glad to know I wasn't the only one who was like, So I also wonder if it's just even if it was a dude, I wonder if he'd be reacting somewhat weird just from the idea that he's told he has to be with this person, he can't be with anyone else. He obviously can't leave Fillory. He's just trying to like do stuff, but it
needed to be clear which of these it was,
especially because he does seem like he like wants to like make her happy, and like and clearly he had to at some level have done it because they had to consummate the marriage. That was like a key part.
Yeah,
and so presumably they were able to do it once. But yeah, I don't know. It's one of those ones where I'm excited theoretically at the idea they might do this, but unfortunately so far it doesn't look like they're going to be able to handle it, which, like I said, isn't something I'll be sad about. I'm not going to yell at them about because they're not the only show who fails at this. Like,
I'm going to yell at them about it because I think that a part of what the show wants to be is a show that's more open about sexuality, and sexuality doesn't always, color inside the lines. So I do think that they had a chance with the show to do more with this situation that they haven't done yet.
Let me actually, it's more of, I guess I'm just not going to be like, I'm not going to pretend like I'm not going to act like this show deserves to be overly punished compared to other shows for it. But I do agree. I mean, I agree that it's disappointing.
Yeah.
I just don't want to entirely be like, act like I'm just yelling at the magicians when this is not a magician only problem. This is a huge problem in general with the fact that in general, like, television just doesn't know how to show sexuality that isn't simple per se. Yeah. And considering sexuality is not simple, it's kind of a problem. I mean, same with, so that causes some problems. It leads to certain things like, when America, especially like when Torchwood came to America, they took a character who was basically omnisexual and made him just gay, because they were like, clearly it's too complicated to explain his sexuality for them, even though it wasn't. It was just, the point was supposed to be he hits on everything. It's pretty easy. And instead they were like, no, that's too complicated because reasons.
Well, so speaking of that, let's do some yelling at the magicians. One of my major problems with this episode is that, now that we're past kind of dealing with the pilot and really moving into like setting up stuff for the season, it feels like the emotional conflicts in this episode are really simple and basic. And the only one that had potentially more complications to it was Elliot's, and as we just talked about, that was like not clear and not necessarily well done.
Well, there was one other one, but they just did the Quentin and Julia conversation also had the potential, but dear Lord, did they fuck that up?
Yeah, we can get that later, but like, but overall, it's just like, I mean, God, the fucking Marina shit in this episode, where the Beast kidnaps her, and Julia's like a little bit uncomfortable about it, and ends up untying her, and then Marina runs away, and then gets scared because she runs to every other person who might help her with this, and then she finally comes back and is like, okay, I'll help you. That entire arc was just like it was so quick and that it felt really shallow to me. And I feel like that applied to a lot in this episode. Like, this episode really bothered me because it felt like it was going back to the season 1 method of like, we're going to do a bunch of really quick scenes. None of them are going to, have time to really breathe or land or be interesting, because we've got to rush through plot.
Yeah, they definitely were trying to set up a lot of stuff, and it was pretty shallow. I will say the improvement of this episode compared to last season, to at least continue to show they've improved, is like, because they have a better sense of characters and because people interact better and they know how to do it, it was a much more entertaining version of this episode than last season's would have been.
It worked better because, now they have some stepping stones that they can skip across, and they're not just trying to walk on water. But
which is why, it's one of those ones where these are the kind of episodes that a lot of television shows have, especially shows like this.
Mm-hmm.
Last season's problem was like half of them were this, and they were worse versions of this. If this is a necessary evil because of all the swamps, of all the stuff they had to deal with in the pilot, and which didn't allow them to properly set things up for the next season, because that's what this was, is basically, all right, here's all the stuff we have to establish this season, with give or take Penny's grand destiny, and presumably the reintroduction of Katie at some point. That's fine. But yeah, it doesn't make it any less frustrating after like last week, when it looked like that the immediate, after like kind of semi-successfully wiping the slate clean, they proceeded to, this may have not been the best time to unleash that episode.
Yeah.
Like, if this had happened, let's say 3 episodes from now, I'd be like, oh, it was going to happen eventually. Most shows have this issue. Even great shows have versions of this, comparison quality wise.
Yeah.
Hannibal never had anything nearly as bad as this, but there's definitely episodes of Hannibal that like had to do some stuff similar to this and did it pretty well. But these episodes inherently are just like lesser episodes than other things. But unfortunately,
I'm also, honestly, I mean, we talk about this as like, a table setter, but I'm also honestly not sure like how much of this is going to be the season as a whole, as opposed to just like they took every storyline they were doing and yanked it forward a step or two.
Yeah, I mean, part of it is that the Beast and God stuff needs to. I think Julia will help with this, because like it feels like a lot of her thread stuff is like really important to setting up the season. And the other problem is, like you said, seeing her, that's probably necessary to set things up, especially because like sooner than later they kind of have to confront the Beast. They can't just stall the entire season. Yeah. Alice is losing her powers, and I'm glad she's actually losing them pretty rapidly, because I was gonna be really annoyed if actually the season just pretended she had them for like 9 episodes.
No, that was good, and that ticking clock provides a little bit of the urgency I was looking for last week.
Yeah, I mean, it was nice that they basically were like, no, it's happening now. Like, her power it's lessening. She's got to move. Partially because of this, partially because like she has to be able to cast the spell. It also sets up nicely theoretically for ways they can do the stuff that happens in the books with her in a way that actually makes sense in the show.
Yeah.
I'm glad they gave him the demons. That was one part I was wondering how they're going to fit in.
See, that to me, like, I was like, look, I'm trying to give you the benefit of the doubt, the magicians. I'm trying to let you just go off in your own story. You know, just stop dealing with book stuff. And they brought that back from the books, and I was like, this just embodies like everything that bothers me about the way the show approaches the story versus the way the books approach the story, which is like that scene in the books is, you know, he gives them these demons, and it's just this weird fucking like graduation ritual that is like, here, we're gonna give you these weapons, and you don't know what they're for. And that just kind of highlights how the book is all about, like, you know, there is no Voldemort, there is no grand plan that you're going to deal with, and you don't know, and yet there's this hint of like, maybe we'll need these someday. And then in the show, it's like, in 3 episodes, we're going to have to fight this. Here's how you're going to fight. Here's the weapon you need to fight it. And so it was just like, it's still offbeat because it's still, you know, fire demons getting put inside people's tattoos, and it was still an interesting scene for the show, but the whole thrust of it is just like a terrible devaluation of what I loved about this show. I need to pause for a second and go poke my water heater. You got to stop making noise. So hang on. And I'm back. Sorry about that.
Sorry. No, I mean, I agree with that. I guess the only exception is at least this time they did it in a way, like, I agree that it's sad that it highlights the difference between the two, which is a good reason maybe just to stop so you don't get reminded all the time about the books. I will say, at least in this case, this fit with what's happening on the show. So it didn't feel like, for example, it didn't feel like other past book events, which literally had nothing to do with what was going on, but just felt like they had to happen because these mandated events happened in the book. At least this had a reason, which was better than nothing. But I will say it's probably true that they're better off at this point just not even bothering with that stuff, because anytime you remind us about the books, you're risking it's having the opposite effect, because clearly they put that in there because they're like, oh, this happened in the book and we need to get in there because everyone loves this part. And instead, it's a lot of times having the opposite effect of where we're like, I wish you just quit reminding us about the book and let us enjoy the show as a show.
Yeah, and it also, it goes back to what we talked about last episode in terms of like things that the book has established for reasons that made sense in that context but no longer make sense in this context. Like in the book, it's the idea of like, you know, they give you a demon because they don't know when or how you're going to need it, but someday you might. And so it's a way to carry something with you conveniently forever. Whereas in the show, they're going to have a confrontation very soon. They're already like arming themselves openly with spells and stuff. It would make more sense in the world of the show and what's happening to just give them a weapon that they can carry around. It doesn't need to be a back demon. For that to work. It's not like the beast is going to search them for magic swords or whatever. Give them a magic sword.
I mean, I will argue, though, at least that it still has the element of surprise I think they wanted to get to. With that said, I do think they missed the simple fix for this, which would have been him simply going, this is supposed to be a graduation present, but you clearly need it now, to at least like acknowledge like kind of the stuff you're talking about. That may have helped some more.
Yeah, that probably would have helped too. Yeah.
Because at least then it would have been an acknowledgement of like, yeah, we do this, but usually it's not for a specific reason. And then he can make a snide comment about how, as always, this group like fucked with things, considering like, you know. And
it would have tied into the fact that like, you know, with what comes up in this episode about outlawing battle magic, that like Break Bills in the show is fairly like pacifist when it comes to magic. And so if he was like, look, we don't have any weapons here, we don't even have battle magic, but we do have this one thing that we do for our graduates,
right? Like that would have been really helpful. Yeah. I will say I hope that I'm hoping this was just a one-time thing, but I'm hoping Fogg is going to have a little bit more of the like at the end of last season when they revealed the time loop.
Yeah,
he was finally able to kind of unleash the contempt he clearly has for all these like 5 students. And like, I kind of wanted that to continue.
He's just like not in that mode anymore because he like they show up and they're like magic is fading from Fillory and therefore from Earth, and he's just like, oh fuck, okay, I'm gonna help you, I'm gonna do whatever I can.
I'm hoping
so like that note is no longer in his mind right now.
Well, and I can live with that for right now. The hope maybe as like they continue, I'm hoping what happens is that maybe this gets solved, and then as they continue, it kind of slowly comes back at least.
Well, what do you think about the scene with the pixie where she was like talking about their shared history? Like, did that add a note to the dean that you felt was good or necessary?
It was, I think, a necessary note. The problem was that note required another note of backstory from the dean we've never gotten.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if in a show which had done more with him, it would have been another great note. Instead, it was like, this is still useful information. I'm glad I had it, but just so we're clear, it kind of comes out of nowhere.
Yeah.
And it's funny to make I like the idea that, you know, it fits because it explains better why she would help them so readily.
Mm-hmm.
Also, I kind of like, you know, how they did a pixie is really interesting because this is, you know, the like amoralness of like pixies and other fae creatures, but in this case, we'll just say pixies, is kind of a classic trait for a lot of lore. So seeing someone do that is kind of really interesting.
I don't know. It seemed kind of a weak representation to me. Like, it didn't seem like she had a hugely strong personality that you wouldn't expect from just like a person who was kind of annoying, or you know, a little more open or whatever. Like the moment that stood out in terms of what you're talking about is the moment when she's like, you know, convince me to help you.
Well, that and like when she's like, when I had sex with a god, it was amazing.
Yeah, but I would expect anybody to feel that way, except
maybe. Well, I mean,
except Julia.
I will say that, like I said, I think the idea of it worked.
Yeah.
I don't think it was executed properly, like a lot of this episode.
Well, yeah,
but I do think
that's kind of a running theme here.
I think the scene was a good idea, and so I don't want to like I'd rather be like it was a good idea but executed poorly than saying like it shouldn't have been there at all, because I don't want them to take that stuff out rather than just do more of it. And even if it's awkward for a while, the more they do of this, the better it's going to be. I think they probably didn't spend enough time with her, which is part of why probably you didn't get the weirdness, because it was like so matter of fact. Like, she starts out kind of weird, then she has the same history, and then if they kind of, let's say, made a little bit, like maybe a couple more, like a little bit more of like them talking about stuff and having explained it and how she reacted, and make her a little more like reticent to give, you know, playful about giving up the spell, I think that would have helped, as opposed to like here it was like, we need this, and she's like, well, okay, it is now determined because it is paid blah blah that I should give the spell to you now. So here you go.
Here's something that I was thinking about in terms of the scene or the episode of the show, is just that, like, you know, one of the things that I love about the books, and I'm sorry to keep doing this, but this is the route we've chosen, is that as it's deconstructing, it does not lose that sense of wonder that Quentin holds, and that because the books are his perspective, you know, that really comes through.
Well, it doesn't lose it. I know what you mean. We need to be somewhat fair. It does lose it, but it loses it in a very different way.
Well, I think the show, I think the books never really go fully away from the idea that like some of the stuff is amazing as well as like, you know, problematic or unexpectedly ordinary or whatever.
Not for long periods of times. There are points in the books that specifically are about Quentin's disillusionment with magic. So
right,
they do happen. They are key parts. I just feel like it needs to be said. Like, this does happen in the books, and like to suggest it doesn't is disingenuous.
Sure, but I'm saying that like I think that the show has gone way too far into the realm of like undercutting everything that they're doing, and has at this point I feel like very little aspect of like, no, some of this is actually really still wondrous.
I did it with the bridge last week, but that's been about it.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I do wonder if they could have Quentin have a couple more scenes with certain other characters. You might get some more, but a big part of what they wanted to do with Quentin's storyline last year was like the I am not special, blah, blah one. So
yeah,
it maybe would work better if they made it more clear that Quentin still felt this way, like more obvious how Quentin felt about this, and like kind of reinforce that more. And then like you could have scenes where characters like, why aren't you freaking out about this? And Quentin would be like, well, you know, blah, 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 blah. And then it can it could also help set up, once again, a lot of the storylines. That's how they could actually do an interesting way of getting towards his storyline in the second book, which, in some level they're clearly going to do. That's a good way of going there by having like some of his disillusionment come back and do some certain things to help him in a lot of ways. But as of now, it's unclear if they're going to be willing to do that or if they're just going to think they're doing it and just kind of.
I don't know how they're going to get to that storyline because I feel like they haven't fully established his new understanding of his place in the story and what that means for him as a person. I'm not sure they're ready to jump to the idea of him taking on kind of a redemptive quest that he thinks is kind of all about him. Which is how I characterize the next book.
I mean, yeah, I agree. That's what I'm saying. Like, that could have been a way for them to do it, and that could be that to me that would explain why they're going so much to undercutting. But yes, they haven't done enough, and other characters aren't calling out enough about things, which is the problem. Now, you could make there is one argument you could make, which is if the Beast part of the storyline really isn't that long.
Yeah, that's what I'm kind of wondering because it seems like like we're heading for a final confrontation between Julia and Renard and the Beast and everybody else in like the next like 2 episodes or something, and then it just becomes something else. Like I don't know.
Which, if that's true, that would be a very Magician's thing.
Yeah.
If they can pull that off, that is a way they can do a proper transition. If it's like they do this stuff and then suddenly it's like we did it, and then people are like, right, but you guys realize you're now like kings and queens of the land, right? And
yeah, like, that's what the next part of the story should be. It should be Quentin has gotten everything he ever wanted, and now how do you grapple with that? And I feel like in the show he still hasn't really gotten to that place yet.
Yeah, and so, well, of course, to properly address that may also depend upon certain other, like I said, the resolution of this event could be very important. So I do wonder if that's how they're going to do it, because for other reasons, like we'll just go ahead and we'll come back to more like Quentin and Alice and other stuff, but we're gonna go over to Julia now.
Sure.
Boy. Like as joyful as it was, and I was so thoroughly entertained by the Beast singing the entire episode.
That's great,
glorious, and exactly what I wanted from stuff. If like the Beast is gonna be around, this is the kind of things I want. And Julia and Mariana's looks on their face when he's just singing and they can't do anything about it, and Julia's just smoking because she's just like, I can't.
Well, so there's also like I'm not sure that there's factual evidence for this within the episode, but in my heart of hearts, when he starts singing, like in the world, the music starts.
Yes, I hope that's true as well, because I think it's very possible. Actually, you're correct. He is that powerful, so yeah, that could totally happen. But that storyline has a lot of potential power to it. But once again, her being I'm fine with her going to get Mariana, if nothing else, because at least, as you said, it does what we're wanting the Elliot storyline, fill her storyline with characters.
Yes.
Which is needed, so she's not just off on her own again. But yeah, there's problems with it. None more so than, and I guess I'm inadvertently going to quit now, we'll talk about this conversation now, which is the part I'm most angry about in this episode, which is the Quentin and Julia conversation, which just
please explain to our listeners why you don't like that scene.
I like the principle of the scene because it acknowledges what I've been wondering, which is Quentin obviously cares about Julia still and wants to make sure she's okay. Especially considering Quentin is the only character who Julia's had a conversation with about like her rape, who has been like, oh my God, are you okay? Do you need to talk about, even the previous one, but like he's the only character whose like response to this hasn't been like, well, that's too bad.
Yeah.
Which, is kind of important. And like that, even if it had just been, so on just a basic level, just the fact that there wasn't more of Quentin just kind of being like, how are you doing? Like,
yeah, it bothered me tremendously that I gave her that hug and then did not like follow it up with like, how are you feeling?
How are you feeling? I know why you had to do what you did. I wish you hadn't, yada, yada. But then on just a pure, like, ridiculous level, like, Quentin shows up and he's like, I need to kill the Beast. And it didn't make any sense to me that Julia's response wasn't like, no, you can't yet. He's like, he's going to kill us. She goes, no, he's not. I made him promise that he can't kill you until he helps me with this thing. And then Quentin go, oh, so that's why the people in the fountain didn't attack us, because the Beast told them not to. Because that's clearly the only reason I mean, that has to be one of the reasons they didn't attack them, is like since they work for the Beast.
I
And
didn't even put all that together, but you're absolutely right. This is
and then she explains this, and then that doesn't mean Quentin's response is oh, okay, then we'll wait. That adds actual proper conflict, because then Quentin could rightfully go, unfortunately, Alice's power is wearing off. We may lose our chance to kill the Beast.
right.
And if we don't kill the Beast, Magic will die. And then suddenly a real conflict between them is set up, where they both don't know what to do because they can't both get what they want potentially for legitimate reasons that aren't ridiculous, as opposed to the scene we got, which was like Quentin showed up and was like, we're going to kill the Beast. And she's like, you can't do that. And neither one explained either. And then, and then Quentin's like, Magic's going to go away, but they don't set up the clock that's necessary to establish why they have to kill him now. And Julia doesn't actually tell them the reason why her going, you have to wait, isn't ridiculous.
Well, even just on a base level of like, it's not like Magic is fading. It's that Magic, he's been like destroying the Magic slowly for a long time, the Beast, and they're worried that he's going to go and finish it off. And this is the first chance that he's talked to Julia since she vanished with the Beast. So he could be asking Julia, is the Beast with you? Does he run off and drink magic? What's going on? And she could be like, oh, he's with me all the time. We're working on this thing. We have a bargain. This was totally like idiot plot stuff where like if the characters had a real conversation.
Yeah, and so I sit there going, I mean, look, I at least enjoyed the fact that, I actually like the fact, like Quentin's response at the end where he's like, I came to like warn you and now we're getting into a fight, was the appropriate response to that conversation. Just it missed all of the actual stuff that should cause them to have that reaction.
Yeah.
And then the hug they have is good at the end where they're trying to do this. At least they still care. But yeah, it was just an entire scene of like, that scene was really necessary, as Quentin was the person who could have talked to her, especially since Katie's not back yet. Could have talked to her about what happened and like made sure she was okay. And then both on an emotional level and a plot level, it just didn't work. And it felt like just they were like, well, we have to have the meet at some point, so we'll do it, but we will conveniently not admit these 5 things.
What do you think? What do you think is going on here in terms of the intentions that lead to this? Like, do you think that it's they were just cutting down pages and they ended up with a scene that like got the basics they wanted but didn't have all the emotional stuff that made it make sense? Do you think that it was more a matter of like, they know that if this conversation happens, their plot is screwed, so they have to leave it off the page? I mean, what do you think is like resulting in this?
I actually think they thought they were saying more than they said, because a lot of Quentin and Julia's conversations effectively are like underwritten.
Yeah.
And rely a lot on the like chemistry between Stella Mauve and the dude who plays Quentin, whose name I don't remember.
Would you like to look it up real quick so that we don't sound like morons spending 20 hours talking about a show whose lead actor's name we don't remember?
Fine. I think it's funnier if I don't remember I think it's way more interesting if we don't remember the names of it. But since he is the lead character, I suppose I should. Okay. I think a lot of the scenes are underwritten between Julia and Quentin. A lot of my complaints last season were that they like would have conversations, they didn't work, and they didn't fully finish them. And I was also really annoyed about the fact that to fix a lot of some of the Julia character quirks, they basically threw Quentin under the bus a lot.
Yeah.
But a lot of their scenes kind of just purely rely on the fact that Jason Ralph and Stella, I don't know how to pronounce her last name, Mauve, have very solid chemistry. As like friends. Yeah. And like you feel like they're people that know each other, who've known each other for a while and are like, care about each other. And so that's why that scene didn't entirely fail. And I think and so to me, it felt like just more like they thought they had done enough and they hadn't, because as always, they think they've done enough because they have such a strong starting base with those 2 characters. And they didn't follow through with the writing. It's somewhat similar to a lot of what they did with Elliot last year, where Hal Appleman is really good at delivering lines. So they would have him do it and then they would just give him a cool line, but nothing to work with. And then you would just watch him do everything with it. because they are like a little too reliant on their actors at times.
Now you're just showing off that you know everyone's name.
I mean, if we're gonna go, I can do that, sure, but I mean, like I think that's.
I agree with you. I think that they don't understand that like there's some stuff you have to like put on screen.
Well, that or it could be a symptom of like I don't know. It could be a symptom of, like you said, they do write the exact scenes, and naturally when you're writing a script, you want to, a lot of times one way of doing it is you write everything that needs to be said, and then you kind of go back and slowly like peel back things that don't need to be said.
Yeah,
because you don't want your dialogue to just be like, purely just saying your emotions and what's happening. So it's also possible that they do start with it, but they just don't stop quite at the right place. And I think they hit it. And my assumption is they thought, I just feel like there's a good chance they probably thought they hit it. As opposed to like they had to cut it hastily and couldn't do it, which is possible, but it just doesn't seem. I think this show seems to have enough support and like money that those kind of issues probably wouldn't happen. But in the end, none of these actors are like necessarily doing a ton of other things to like, you could see a version of this be like they had to shoot this scene in like an hour because one of the actors had to go do something. It's possible, but it doesn't seem like these actors are quite there yet for that. So, it's just one of those like really frustrating, like another example of like somehow this show managed to like fix a lot of the Quentin and Julia relationship and then just like squandering it. I guess it's one of the few things I think they actually improved upon from the book, and yet they seem to not want to actually like utilize it properly.
Yeah.
And it's really frustrating, and it's why it stood out more, because I spent that entire scene just being like, right, but like, aren't you going to tell him this? Aren't you going to tell her this? Why are you leaving? Why are you just longingly looking at each other like, I wish things weren't, especially because the way they end that scene was a really interesting, like, things are not, like, we can't seem to get things right between us no matter what we do with good intentions, which sets up potentially really well, like a lot of what their friendship kind of is, what they deal with a lot in book 2.
Mm-hmm.
And, that's a really good way for the show to do it from a way that makes sense for the show. And so, like, it's just a very frustrating thing to see right now. And like, but it does kind of suggest to me, I think that, like, I do think there's a good chance a lot of this stuff, both those storylines are going to be resolved in like the next episode or 2 episodes with a lot of what they're separated for right now. And then we'll see what happens from there, or at least some part of it is like, it makes you wonder if one reason if nothing else, if the beast, I could even see the beast being like taken care of and the Renard part just becomes your storyline going forward. They don't actually, awesome. It's hard to say, but like, but in general, like the Julia storyline just kind of like, it was fun because the beast made it fun. But part of the reason he made it so fun is there was really nothing there, because really the entire episode was like, draw this diagram, and she's like, I'm trying, and he's like, not good enough, and then he kidnaps, like you said, he kidnaps her, and then that's it. It's just kind of like she was like treading water, like more than anyone else.
Well, let's speaking of that and the beast and execution problems, like, what did you think of that moment when he and he's like walking on a New York street and he's singing? We're like, it's funny, he's singing, it's like a big musical number because he's outside, and it was like, but it didn't show him like going anywhere or doing anything, and it didn't like make it a musical number. He was just like walking and singing. Like that seemed to be like a huge failure of like in execution on that part.
I mean, I still liked it quite a bit, but yeah, they probably should have done more. Maybe he should have actually walked to a place specifically, and they could have like had it play, and then it shows him like walking into a door and shows like the outside of Mariana's like place,
right?
Or him destroying a barrier or something like that. I also was kind of annoyed about the scene with her and the dean, where like she's like, I have this issue, and he's like, not my problem, and I'm like, I feel like maybe you should tell the others this is happening. because this seems relevant to because the whole reason the Beast was kidnapped was because or was taken by Julia was because of this situation. So at least you should maybe apprise them of the situation. Or even if Quentin had said part of why he went to go see her is because he heard about what happened from the dean. That would, when he was talking to Julia, that also would have helped.
I have two things from this. One is I don't even understand in that scene whose side I'm supposed to be on. Am I supposed to feel bad for Marina that she's horribly burned all her bridges because she burned all her bridges? Am I supposed to be feeling like the dean has it right to send her away? I couldn't even tell what the intention of that scene was.
I actually think that was supposed to be a little bit of both. Mm-hmm. That part, I said I don't have a problem with the scene itself in terms of how I reacted and how she reacted. I think she appropriately was I have nowhere else to go. It was a good scene of showing why she would go willingly to be bait. Is she first tried to be break bills because the dean I think that's also one of the reasons they maybe had the dean dickish tone towards them, the main cast kind of lower in this episode to kind of show that he does care about his students. So the idea being that she's I have no choice. I have to come here because I just have to hope that he's a better person than me, so he'll protect me.
I guess I just feel kind of after she was an over-the-top villain in season 1 that I was not ready to turn on a dime and acknowledge her perspective as somebody that I really care about.
I mean, yeah, it's true that they didn't do a good enough job of since the end of her storyline was Katie's mom dies because of stuff they do, and then she doesn't really she didn't have the arc she probably needed where she talked to Julia at the end of the season when Julia was with the new group. And they had a conversation that would have dealt with this, or hell, I could have even lived with this being the conversation because of some kind. I guess but yeah, I mean it's hard to say. I was kind of okay with it if no other reason because I'm well, I know she's terrible, but no one deserves to get murdered by a fox god.
Well, here's my other question because the show is kind of using these Renard things to the events to try and it really feels like it's meant to feel kind of Fillory CSI Fillory, where oh he's targeting hedge witches and he's committing a series of ritual murders one by one, and it's I can't tell if he's supposed to be roaming the countryside eating hearts every 2 weeks because that's his serial killer pattern, or if the group that he murdered was exactly like the other group that he murdered and he basically just he does this much more infrequently based on who tries to summon people.
Well, that, and I feel there's also a strong possibility that I'm not entirely convinced that Renard actually killed the other hedge witch.
Yeah.
I could definitely see that.
You think it was the Beast?
I think it's possible.
Yeah.
It does seem weird that Renard specifically decided to target just that witch. It doesn't seem to fit with the pattern. Unless they revealed the other hedges had had to deal with him or something. So it's kind of, and the Beast has kind of talked about how he has a grander plan, which is what kind of makes me interested to see how they're going to resolve that they are going so quickly, as the Beast seems to be suggesting he has this great grandiose plan that he wants Julie to be a part of, which would seem to suggest that the Renard is a side quest in the Beast being, the Beast is basically doing one of those turns where he's the villain who kind of pretends to not be a villain for most of the season, and then his Grandmaster plan comes into play at the very end.
I mean, it definitely feels like he's trying to pull an Emperor Palpatine, where he's leading her down, the garden path to hell, where he's, they brought back that thing about the shade again this episode. I feel like he's really just trying to get her into that place where, she's corrupted by revenge or has to attack her friends or something along those lines.
Yeah, and I think that could also work really interestingly if they decide to, let's say, do if they decide to do something have it may even be that he's lonely and he just wants someone else who will understand what's happening or something like that. Which, if they want to do some more character development for him, which could be really interesting. Because, if you're going to have the Beast in this capacity, unless they do plan to just kill him off or make it look like he's killed off in an episode or two, this is a real prime opportunity for like to do some interesting character development with him as like who he is now, as opposed to like his backstory. Because, you know, right now we're like, we know who he was and why he's this, but like seeing more, because even, you know, in that's something they could do differently in the book did. Even the book kind of to a degree didn't necessarily, it fit with the book, because the book whole idea is like you don't always get the answers you need, and like how they kind of reveal all that happens with him is a lot different. But like for the show purposes, you could do a lot of really interesting stuff with him, especially considering the actor they got to play him is pretty good. You know, he does stuff.
He's doing a good job.
He's doing a good job. He's nice. He feels villainous. He kind of nails everything properly. He looks kind of like he has the right look for the kind of thing you want, and it kind of all fits. But you know, they're still struggling, just like the kind of last year, to fully figure out how they want to use Julia correctly. Which is why, like, I think, you know, when they can get her where she's more permanently with the rest of the cast, it will help a lot. Partially because she'll finally get to react off of more than like Quentin and like crazy people.
Yeah.
But you know, for now, like, yeah, this storyline was weird, because it probably had most of my favorite moments from the episode were from this storyline, but like the storyline as a whole was pretty garbage.
Yeah.
You know, like it just didn't work, and it was kind of sad. And then, you know, I mean, which is better than, let's say, like, you know, the Penny storyline, which like they still haven't quite explained what's going on. I don't actually mind the seduction part's hilarious, because they were doing that last season, so following up with that is perfectly fine with me. I also enjoyed that because it was kind of an acknowledgement of like he's like a grad student, so like this isn't that inappropriate. And so like I at least kind of enjoyed that part. But yes, you know, so that part specifically was an issue. But I don't, you know, it is true that whereas everyone else at least kind of had a general idea of where they were going, they decided to like not really explain what's going on with Penny, just kind of treat the symptom of whatever's going on with him.
Yeah, like you're right. I have no idea what his larger storyline is. He just fixed his hands, so everything, like, after our argument last episode about whether Penny's hands being returned but suborned was a matter of like erasing consequences or not. I was disappointed in this episode that they went further along the line of erasing those consequences by having them fixed.
I mean, I don't think, obviously it's not permanent, but I'm hoping that maybe best case, maybe they just like that next episode they'll get into it and they felt they had to cover like a certain amount of bases.
Yeah.
Worst case, which isn't still a terrible case, is like maybe it's just they're like, look, Penny kind of has to tread water because we're about to do this big, huge thing with the Beast, and like kind of this weird mini climax for like the season, and like we just need to kind of set things up with him, but like we can't really pay those off till we're able to start telling like some stories that can breathe a little bit more. And they just felt they needed to put something in kind of similar to like, you know, Game of Thrones, feeling like they had to show what was happening to Theon.
I guess, but like if you wanted to have filler for him, like the first part of the episode where he's just drinking Margot's potion would have worked fine if they had just said, oh, this is a temporary fix and he's just going to be kind of, you know, off his balance for a while. And then that would have carried through this entire episode. We didn't need that second half.
Yeah, I will say it would have made more sense for like if they needed to do that, it would this part to have happened an episode or two from now.
Yeah.
Like maybe or even like next episode, like he has the potion, but they're like, we have to go fight the Beast, and his hands aren't working, and he has to go get this fixed. You know.
Yeah, it sort of comes back to, I mean, you know, I'm trying to think about the theme in this episode, and I really felt like there were kind of two. There was one that was, you know, you can't get away from your past. So that was, you know, Elliot's childhood on the farm. It was, you know, Marina having burned all her bridges. You know, even in a silly way, it's, you know, the Beast doing all these like old timey tunes.
It's the, you know, even the one part you could argue worked to the Quentin and Julia scene, like the fact how their friendship had fractured meant that even this attempt to like a reconciliation doesn't work like they intended it to.
Exactly. Yes. And then the other sort of not as cohesive theme was like just noticing like there was a lot of scenes in this episode of like people offering or rejecting help, whether that was like the Beast renewing his offer to take her shade, or different people trying to heal Penny, things like that.
Quentin telling Alice if there's any way he can take the load off of her.
Yes, which I liked. I thought that was a good moment.
I also thought though that worked. That's the one example where it worked, because I thought it was actually more like legitimately like because there's a version where she's like she's being stubborn, but I actually think the version was more like legitimately she's like, I would love to, but you're useless.
Well, there's also a version of that where that would have come off as him like going back on his realization that he's not the hero and trying to take the spotlight back, and they avoided that too. So
because like I said, well. The way he asked it worked really well. That's why I thought her response worked, because it was him just being like legitimately like, if I could help you get through this, because we need to get through this, I would. And then I felt like her response was like, I know, but unfortunately you can't. And I actually think to some degree Quentin also knew that.
Yeah.
I think that's part of why it worked, is like he did it and he meant it sincerely, but they both knew that, that time had passed. And there's only there's a limit to how much he's going to be able to help, Now, obviously he has his demon, he can help a little bit more, but
right. And I feel like, there is some thematic elements to the various storylines that we have going on right now, in terms of like Elliot having to balance his responsibilities with, the needs of others, and, Alice's, general thing about, power and its costs. But I'm just mystified as to what they're doing with this Penny thing, because that's what got me off on this tangent, because we've seen this Hand storyline basically go through 4 or 5 separate beats of he loses his hands, he gets them back, but there's a problem with them, and Margot tries to help him, his professor helps him, it seems like she did a good job. And I'm just I don't understand what this is saying about Penny. I don't understand what what we're supposed to see as the difference between these different encounters. It really just feels like this weird arbitrary plot that's just ticking back and forth between he has his hands, he doesn't have his hands. That's just like you said, filling time.
Yeah, I mean, even if it pays off in a way of this is all building up to where he tries to help in the final fight and is useless.
Yeah.
And part of this is supposed to show how even with all the help, his own decisions had cost him. It made him almost cost his friends and his own life be in danger, which kind of works. But even then, they haven't quite set it up properly. So yeah, I don't know. It's weird. I guess the Penny part wasn't the most infuriating part to me, because it's such a non-issue storyline that, unlike the Quentin and Julia scene, which was just a clusterfuck of missed opportunities and incompetence.
Well, it did make me angry. I don't think anything in this episode made me angry. I just felt like a lot of it just kind of sat there on the screen, not working for me. And that was bothering me throughout a lot of the episode. And I thought Penny was probably the stuff that fell flattest, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely was an episode that felt like I was a lot of times being well, this is kind of working, but at the same time I was at the same time I was actively aware that it wasn't ever quite connecting like it was supposed to.
Yeah.
There's a nagging, basically you always saw the thread that you could pull, and you were trying your best not to pull it, of everything unraveled.
Yeah, it kind of felt like this really worked in the outline, and then they wrote the script and it didn't.
Yeah, and I think that's part of why the episode remained, passable. Is that there was clearly a strong base. They just weren't able to quite fill it out properly.
Yeah.
And that could actually just be from I mean, and then it is possible that specifically could be because just their shooting schedule meant they had to rush through it.
Or it could be as I've maintained about last season, that they're just not terribly good writers and they have problems doing things that are hard.
It could be, but it also could be a combination of both. I mean, since we kind of brought up, the idea of maybe this could be an example of that, just because of how weirdly strong, last season that felt more, because last season the outline would have been terrible. And so
that's true.
That's the thing. This season, where they were going, with the exception of Penny, which is I could just totally see being just them just trying to make stuff work till they can get to the real meat of what they're doing with them. All these ideas were theoretically okay. I mean, there's still some issues.
What was his meat last season? Because I don't even really remember. He had this destiny, and he was kind of upset about that because he doesn't like being controlled. I don't remember what
his
How we
beat
sum up his storyline last season.
His beat last season was that like he got this traveler power, but unlike the Penny in the books who like likes the fact that he has this power because it means he's special, this Penny like hated his fucking powers.
Mm-hmm.
And like basically was like Penny's like the person who Penny's purpose is I feel like to be like the joke people have about about like a character who realizes they're about to be an anime protagonist or some protagonist and they're like nope and just like turn around and walk away. Penny's whole point is constantly feel like they're like your destiny is, and his response to me like nope, and he just turns around and walks out the door. And so a lot of his last season was basically like them trying to be like, you have this power and it's special, and him being like, I don't want it, don't care. And then him being like, you know, and then especially considering he'd always thought he was just like a telepath, basically. And then finding out he is this, and him like trying to accept his destiny and like trying to be close to people. And that's how they tried to use Katie as a person who like he could actually talk to. And then like he went
along with them to Fillory at the end of the last one because he was trying to rescue that girl.
Right. And then his big thing was he wanted to rescue the girl, and because of that he was willing to work with Quentin on stuff because he knew Quentin, like they, you know, he basically a bunch of coincidences kept occurring to allow him to keep connecting. And then finally, yes, he was like, we're getting this girl back. It's all I care about. The rest of this is garbage. You know, a very like, you know, somewhat heroic thing where he's like, I'm going to help her and all this stuff.
So what does he care about now? Like, is he down with the team? Like,
it's unclear because the other thing is to remember that the other reason he wanted, like the other big part of his storyline last season was Penny went from a person who originally wanted to get rid of his powers because he wanted to protect his own skin to a person who like, yeah, he was like, I'm going to save this girl. She deserves to be saved. Like, you know, his stuff with Alice kind of revealed like he could maybe not be a dick, and really it's just he's being a dick to Quentin, and they kind of established that he's just kind of being a dick to Quentin. Though like this episode did do at least a good job of having him be a dick to a couple other people and kind of start to establish that like, you know, it's not entirely just a Quentin centric thing.
Yeah, but he had the one moment in the demon scene where he just like says something mean about Quentin, and they cut to Quentin, and Quentin is like barely even reacting to it anymore. Like he doesn't really. It's not like he has something to say. He's just kind of like, whatever.
And he's also drunk, so
that's true.
But yes, he does say that, and Quentin's just like, whatever, man. He did get some great facial reactions of the demon going to Quentin's back and him just being like, oh hell no.
Yeah.
It's hard to say. I think he is. Here's what I think. I think he's still a little bit self-preservationary. Like he wants to do this. He also does kind of care about Alice now as a friend. I think there's that. And like I think at some level he like I think probably what he wants is to get rid of the beast so he can be safe and make sure his friend's safe. And then probably in his mind, if he could do that, he'd probably then just kind of go off and do whatever he wanted. Yeah. He doesn't like being controlled. So he doesn't like being told what to do. And so he's supposed to like this rebel that kind of works. I think that's why one reason they really like Penny could really have benefited from being in the Julia storyline. Or even if it was just because like Katie comes back and she brings him over. But like I think that could have helped. Him getting more scenes with people like Margot would help. You know, so we'll see. You know, this episode sadly did kind of after last episode kind of used her really well. This episode kind of like once again kind of like put her back in the role she was mostly last season with a little more lines.
Back to the sidelines with you.
Which hopefully was just a like necessary evil because there's a lot of characters they're trying to talk about, and some characters are always going to be sidelined when you have this many characters. Just how it is.
She did have the great line with Rhode Island though.
Yeah, like that was great. And then later when after being like and then later when she was trying to figure out the rest of it, she's like, okay, it was a lucky guess. You know, that was really good. I mean, the scene with the books was really good. Quentin had that great line of when you know when we talk about the title of the episode of Hotel Spa
Potions.
Of him being like, here are the lines, and he's like, all right, this is my favorite, and he's like, because it makes absolutely no sense. And like him just like that was like one of those few moments of him embracing the zaniness, and then it being correct made it even better.
Yeah,
like it sounded like a trashy romance novel basically. And that's what it was pretending to be. So like they have those little moments that still work, and but yeah, like, and I hope that like Margot will get to do more stuff next episode, especially once she's now around Elliot again, since they obviously build off each other. She also seems, like I said, a good foil for Penny, because like she's the only one who, because even Elliot's ways of like hitting back at people are from a more self-hatred-y kind of place.
Mm-hmm.
Margot just kind of does it because she unlike Penny, she doesn't just focus on Quentin. Whereas Penny, like, a lot of times purely focuses on Quentin, which I know some reviewers have definitely gotten annoyed with. They're like, it sounds like this doesn't even make sense. Why quit? Like, kind of like we talked about where, or maybe we talked about it, so I can't remember, like last week when Penny just yelled at Quentin for being a nerd, and it's like they all just they all just did this. What the hell, Penny? What the hell? Now it just seems like you're being a dick to Quentin for no reason. Which is a problem, since like a lot of what they really did last season is a good job, was made it where like he was being a dick to Quentin a lot of times because Quentin deserved to be a dick too.
Yeah.
And this season, because Quentin's like not acting quite that way, it's not quite the same.
Yeah, Quentin is definitely like he's either improved or he's just not doing it right now, and so it feels a little weird. But I was going to say I'm just thinking about the show. I feel like a big problem that I'm having right now is that like the part that they've chosen to draw out of the story, this Beast Hunt and by extension Reynard, it's just like not an interesting part of the story to me. Certainly not compared to like, Quentin wanting and finding Fillory, or the stuff that, you and I both love in book 2, that we haven't gotten to yet. It just feels like this is kind of, there's the basic problem with this storyline, which is that, like, I'm not sure why I should really care about it as much.
I mean, it would be more interesting if they did the Julia stuff right. Like, just like we talked about how, like, the idea of watching Elliot try to become a ruler and not just time skipping it. The idea of watching potentially how, like, Julia deals with grief is a really interesting storyline, but they're not fully embracing it. And so it just feels like I'm like, well, if you're not going to embrace this, though, that's the strong part of that was not the actual, like, attacking Reynard, God killer part. The strong part was how does Julia use the beast in their conversation, deal with her own trauma, and yada yada, and like that's a potentially like juicy storyline, but instead they're just kind of diluting it.
Yeah, I think like what makes that Reynard moment in book 3, and then also a lot of the stuff I love about her kind of flashbacks in book 2 is that like what makes that so great to me is how active a character she is and how like dedicated and enthusiastic about going after the things that she wants, which is always a very like good character trait for people to have in a story. And I feel like a lot of that is kind of sapped of its strength here.
Yeah, they have made her a little bit more reactive. Some of that I think is good. Oh, sorry. Some of that I think is good. Yeah, they have made her a little bit more reactive. Some of which I think is good. Like, I think it helped like smooth out some of the character, but like they have definitely gone too far. And it has robbed her of like, even when she was like being like a somewhat problematic character in the early book, she was always active. There was never this moment where she was like, well, whatever. Other than, even the moments when in the book where she was like, I guess I'm going to give up because of this. It was like, as soon as she had something, she immediately, got in. It lasted for like 3 pages.
Yeah.
Because, and it actually had to do, and then and that moment actually worked there since she's brought out of her funk because of something Quentin did.
Yeah.
Like the whole reason she almost the only time she's not active was entirely based on one thing. And then like Quentin tried to fix something and that actually like made her go further down the hole. So like, yeah, I mean, this episode is definitely very problematic. It's still from a better foundation than season 1 was, and I'm not like, unlike last season, if I when I see this, I'm not just like, well, whatever, this is what the show is. I don't think this necessarily is, but this is not the best timing for this type of episode to have occurred.
Yeah, it's very distressing because like in the first season, those early episodes had huge problems. I'm not going to say they didn't. But at the same time, the basic story worked because we knew what they were doing. This is a guy who didn't know magic, and now he's going to a magical school, and stuff's going to happen to him. And that's got more. That had more of a hook and a foundation to it that made sense and was something we cared about than I think where they're at right now, which is like, they're in danger from this monster, and they don't all want to kill the monster immediately, but they kind of have to. Like it's very attenuated, and it feels like sort of the hangover from last season that I hope goes away quickly, because this is like this cannot drag on much longer than this.
I mean, I think next episode is going to be really important. I think we're going to know after next episode if they have if they understand proper momentum the season needs to have, and if like we can actually we're going to understand next episode more than likely if this season has a chance to really be something cool, or if a season like is just going to be more competent than last season, which is okay, but like still not to expect too much. I really think, maybe if you want, maybe depending on what happens, you might stretch that into to episode 4 as well. But like, definitely at the end of the next 2 episodes, we're gonna know. Like, we're gonna know either way, and like, and it, and it will certainly flavor like even just how we're talking about it. Because obviously, if I'm just like, well, the show is what it is, we're gonna be a lot more probably boring to talk about than if we're like, well, it's trying and blah blah. So hopefully, even if it's just they fail miserably, but they try to do something really crazy, I hope that's what's about to happen.
Yeah, ambition is always better. If you're gonna have problems.
Yeah.
But I guess we'll see next week, huh?
Yeah, I guess we will. And I think that's pretty much, we somehow talked way more than probably this episode deserved about a lot of nothing. But that's it for this edition of the podcast. As always, you can find our other thoughts on pop culture at www.insidethekraken.com. Hold on a second.
Joke time.
Shut the fuck up.
Don't you like joke time?
I'm trying to think of a joke. I was trying to make it so you wouldn't have to edit out random words. There's a couple places. Okay. But we have to go now. The Kraken has decided he's going to put his own version of a Broadway. We have to go now. The Kraken decided he's going to put his own version of a Broadway musical in New York. It's going to be like literally in the middle of Times Square, and a lot of people are going to die.
I was trying to think of the thing, but I can't. That's okay. All right, I'm going to stop mine.
Okay, yeah, I wasn't sure how you wanted to do this.
Yeah, we're going to make these separate files.
Fine.
I mean, they have to end up being separate files eventually, and it's much easier to do it this way than for me to do it in Audition.
Look, I'm still hopeful for this season. It's not gone yet. 3 and 4 will know.
This episode was just like brutal in terms of long-term prospects for this show and storyline.
I just feel like that is only. I still feel like it to me. It just made it clear that 3 and 4 have to be something big. Or yes, then I agree. Like this only makes sense. Like
the Julia storyline in this episode, the conflict in her storyline was she's trying to draw on a piece of paper, but the beast is annoying.
I'm aware, which is why I said this only works if literally 3 and 4 are like shit's just about to go crazy. And they just needed some time to get, and they basically were like, we have decided for momentum purposes to go crazy, but we need a little bit of time to set it up. So we'd rather have some brief setup for it than nothing. And I can respect that if that means like next episode, like they're fighting the beast. Because like the preview seems to suggest that they're having a massive showdown with the beast next episode.
We'll see.
And then episode 4 maybe deals the same stuff, and if it also could set up a really interesting storyline if like one thing they can actually do with Julia is if they actually have like the Beast keep offering to like sever her shade, but she doesn't do it, but like then he's gone, and when she decides to do it, she has to do it herself, and it like leads to more problems.
I don't know, man. Just don't know. Just don't know.
In you go, podcast.
Did you listen to the last Magicians episode that went up?
Not yet.
Yeah.
Why?
I was wondering if you liked the music I put in.
Oh, I forgot we had to do that. Yeah, I'll listen to that.
Okay.
All right, it's uploading.
Okay. Mine's still exporting.
It looks like you feel better. I did watch Sam put in his calendar when he's got to be home so he can get Google Fiber installed. He was like, "Oh right, I really need to stop being a dick to Caillou about at least this one thing." He's like, I was like, "Right." I was like, "Yeah, no, I'm actually putting that in the calendar right now."
Yeah. Well, our conversation about that I was just like, "Oh, I scheduled this for this Saturday. We're all good, right?" And he's like, "Well, yeah, but we have to decide which room to install it in, and each room has different, pros and cons. But I think we'll, this part's gonna go in the garage. It's good, but you gotta, they just got to put wires into the attic. And the only way to get to the attic is like move my car, which you're gonna have to do by like unlocking it and putting it in neutral and then pushing it because you can't turn it on." And I was just like, "Okay, you need to just be here because I'm not doing any of that shit."
He was probably like, "I get it."
Okay. So I go to new and let me go listen to. I didn't actually make the script, so let me go make the script. It's just gonna be better for me. Oscar Mega Thread.
That's pretty funny. I guess one of the teachers in Texas who had selected their students as a register the sex offender because they were 17. So it was just
Hello? Hello? Can you hear me?
You there?
You're like horribly futzed. I can't really understand you.
Hello?
Hello? Can you hear me? You're really shitty. I can't hear you.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, but your audio is like weird and like compressed, like you're speaking really fast or something.
Okay. I don't know what to tell you.
Let's stop the.